How do you check if the party notices something if the party doesn't know to look? Call for a bunch of perception checks? What if they fail? Now the players are suspicious of something their characters are unaware of. Okay, then just roll behind the screen. I don't know about you, but that takes a while. And it's fairly suspicious, not to mention not all DMs have their players' stats on hand. Drop some hints to prod the players into making the check themselves? Better, but in my experience that tends to be hit or miss. It'll feel way too obvious, or the clues will go over the party's head. Alright, so what do you suggest? Passive perception. It's important enough to have a dedicated spot on the character sheet, yet I see so few groups use it. In essence, it's a DC all NPCs have to beat on their stealth check for whenever the party isn't actively searching. And the craziest thing? This can apply to all skills. Just like my video about swapping ability score and skill combinations, this comes straight from the player's handbook. Not the Dungeon Master's Guide, which I erroneously claimed last time. Expect my apology video soon, ukulele included. In short, passive skills are just replacing your roll with a static 10 before your modifier. The most famous passive is passive perception, as mentioned, but I think some natural progression emerges when you consider the usage of other skills, such as passive stealth and passive insight. If the party's trying to sneak, have them roll stealth. It's a chosen action, so let them roll. But if they're just wandering about and not explicitly making an effort to move quietly, but someone has the risk of noticing them, passive stealth is a great way to handle that risk. The party shouldn't automatically fail because they didn't specify they were sneaking, but it also feels a bit odd to go from not stealthing to making a roll when on the verge of being discovered. Passive stealth allows that middle ground, where naturally stealthy characters are harder to spot, even when they're not trying to be. And if you're worried about things like advantage or disadvantage, remember that those numbers are roughly equivalent to a plus or minus 5, so you can modify the passive skill as needed. Some of you might be wondering, wait a minute, isn't this just free reliable talent? Automatically rolling a 10 before modifiers is broken. To that I say, depending on who you play with, you might be able to take a 10 or take a 20 based on how much time you have available for your roll. And while it might be broken for the plus 12 stealth rogue, who always has advantage, so it's actually a plus 17, and the plus 10 persuasion bard, who can bump that up even further with magic, the rogue might do okay at passive persuasion, and the bard will probably struggle with passive stealth. The only thing this does is keep the check streamlined, so it's making the character have an average roll. And if they're a rogue, they should probably be stealthy on average, just like a bard should be persuasive on average. Personally, I get the most mileage out of using passive skills when I need to compare the player's stats against something they don't know they're being compared to. And again, rolling behind the screen can be useful here, but you roll behind the screen when you want to hide the players from the result of an action that they're not privy to but are aware of. Passive skills are more subtle, where you can just compare values without the players ever being the wiser. For things like passive persuasion or passive history, those are the sort of skills where I would segment incidental successes based off of them. Usually, you're trying to persuade someone, so you'll make a roll. It's an active thing. But your passive persuasion is a good vibe check for how receptive folks are before you even try to convince them. It's your riz. In short, passive skills can also be used to gauge how far you get before a check is even required. A high passive persuasion might allow you to haggle down the price of an item before a check is ever made. A high passive insight might have the DM answer questions you have without needing a roll at all. So, is this broken? If you think letting your characters be good at what they're good at on average is broken, then yeah, stick to rolling everything. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're comfortable with the rogue naturally being stealthy and the bard naturally being persuasive and the cleric naturally knowing a lot about religion, I say go off. And remember, if it wouldn't make sense for a high roll to lead to a success, a passive skill wouldn't succeed either. Just because you have a 22 passive perception doesn't mean you can see the enemy when you literally said you're closing your eyes, covering your ears, and going la 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 la. I'll make you have fun.